and he does it despite us. And I think it also gives hope to families. I felt very discouraged sometimes. I would hear speakers when I was a young homeschool mom, and it sounded like they had everything together, and I could not get everything together. Mm-hmm. And I think it's encouraging to families to see that, things aren't perfect for us. Mm-mm. We don't even have perfect days.
No. Oh, no.
From the Florida Parent Educators Association, home of the largest homeschool convention in America, this is the Not by the Book podcast. I'm your host, FPEA Chairman Suzanne Nunn, and together we will hear from guests who share their journey to who and where they are today. Each one of them at some point left the expected path, ripped the page out of the book that says you have to do it like this, and made their own way. I hope these conversations inspire you as much as they do me. Today I am talking with Hal and Melanie Young, authors of Raising Real Men and creators of Craftsman Crates. They share the story of how they met, their dreams and aspirations, challenges, and how ultimately everything converged in a beautifully intentional family and family business that has become an inspiration to so many families today. Listen now as we pick up the story of how they met.
Well, it's funny because we were kind of similar kids growing up. Mm. We were the kids that read all the time and had great imaginations and dreamed big dreams. Mm-hmm. It's interesting because I always kind of wanted to be a writer. I'm one of these kids that, constantly narrating things in my head. But I always thought I'd write novels, not nonfiction.
Right.
Yeah, likewise. I mean, that's the same. That's the same thing. And it was kind of funny to me. It seemed like no matter where I went and, up into adult life, wherever I went, I ended up with writing assignments. They would choose me to be the secretary for the meeting or to write the newsletter, or I need a report. Would you do this for me? It's sort of like everybody was pointing their fingers at me saying, you're the writer. We're designating you as a writer. And, okay.
Same.
So that was kind of like preordained.
Yeah, it's interesting. And, I see so many things in both of our childhoods that led up to what we're doing now. I grew up in an entrepreneurial family. Mm-hmm. My family had a family business that they started in a really rough time. And I grew up going to the store and played under Dad's desk,
And she thought she'd escaped that when she met me because, see, I was going into the military and I was from a corporate family and had a corporate career starting. And so we got all out of that unsteady, entrepreneurial, uncertain lifestyle that you grew up in.
That's so funny. So when did you all meet?
We met at college. We both went to Clemson University.
Okay.
And we met our freshman year.
Yep.
And that was
Well, we were both in the honors college. Mm-hmm. And so we lived in the honors dorm together and we just became good friends. Mm-hmm. And by the time I left after our freshman year to go to a different college, but by that time we were best friends and mm-hmm. we stayed best friends.
Right.
And it wasn't until a couple of years later mm-hmm. that I think you were in Europe and you wrote me a letter.
I think that was the summer that I was studying in Germany. And I wrote her a letter just thinking, and I said, it just occurs to me that I go out with different girls that I've met at school, and I go out with this one girl, and I think, well, she's really a lot of fun, but she's just not as smart as Melanie. And I go up the next one and say, well, she's really smart, but she just doesn't love the Lord like Melanie. And I meet the next one and say, well, she's really godly, but she's not as cute as Melanie. And it finally dawned on me, well, maybe if my brain is always taking me back to compare to Melanie, maybe I should be pursuing Melanie.
That's great.
So Hal wrote me a letter and expressed this to me, and I flipped out because mm-hmm. when I had left Clemson, Hal was a baby Christian, and we were close friends. I couldn't imagine anything else, so I invited mm-hmm. him to come visit me at my college to talk him out of it, mm-hmm. and he talked me into it.
Yeah. That's great.
So we were just confused friends for about 6 months there. And finally decided, let's go about this systematically.
And we're still best friends.
Yeah.
We're still best friends. We've been married nearly 40 years now.
That's awesome. So, you met through college, and both of you, honestly, in honors college, so high achievers educationally. What were you planning on doing as a career?
Well, I think we both started in engineering, and that's where I graduated. And I went from there into the military for 4 and some odd years. But I was thinking technical engineering, scientific type of stuff. That was just the career that I was planning.
I went to the North Carolina School of Science and Mathematics, and in the era that I came through, if a girl could do science and math, they were encouraged to do science and math, And so I was very much pushed that way. My degree's in biology, minor in chemistry. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't sure what direction I wanted to go with that. At one point, I wanted to go to medical school, but the Lord had different plans. And, it's so interesting because I can see all the way the Lord brought everything together, because my interest in science has meant that, we're able to incorporate a lot of studies and research into what we write. Mm-hmm. And so that we understand the scientific basis of what we're talking about. And, on the other hand, I remember, we've been married maybe 10 years. And you wrote a Christmas letter to our friends and family. And I remember reading it and thinking, oh, my goodness, Hal is wasted on engineering. Because he's a good engineer, but he is a great writer. And it's fascinating to me to see how the Lord brought all these different strands together to bring us to what we ended up doing. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's an incredible truth. I mean, sometimes we don't see them and how they're all going to weave together. But when you do and you can look back, it's like, that's incredible, how it worked. And so following along a little bit with your timing. So you graduated from college, both of you with interest in science and engineering.
Yeah. Engineering.
How long after you graduated from college were you married?
Right. Well, I went to pharmacy school for a year, and then Hal and I were married right after he graduated from college.
Yep.
Okay.
I graduated a year earlier.
Okay.
And so we were married right out of college. I was a housewife working on a graduate degree in education, and Hal was an Air Force officer.
Well, we discussed everything to death before we got married. And one of the things we had decided was, we want to homeschool our children. And at the time, there were still some court battles being fought in some states. And me going into the military, I had no guarantees where I'd be going. And so we decided maybe it would be prudent for Melanie to get a master's in education, maybe get her teacher certification. So that would be one layer of defense if we got sent to one of those
states where they were arresting
one of those
people.
sketchy states, And so,
right.
Yeah, so she started on that master's in ed and got nearly finished with it, but that's another story.
Yeah, and then when Hal got out, engineering job in California, and then we moved back to the South. We were in Louisiana for a few years, and finally ended up back in the Carolinas. Mm-hmm. And along the way, the Lord started giving us boy after boy after boy.
Yeah.
We ended up with 6 boys. Mm-hmm.
How long were you married before you had your first?
About 4 years.
Okay.
Let's see.
Yeah.
Yeah. Coming up on
3.5 years.
3.5 years. Because we had, everybody had said, oh, you've got to do all this stuff, when you're just a couple before the children come and tie you down. And
we didn't find that to be true at all.
We didn't find it to be true at all, but we had been awash in that. So when the first child came along, we said, oh, okay,
this is
cool.
really fun. We went backpacking in the Sierras with him, all kinds of things.
Yeah, but there was a little delay there. So, yeah.
So along that way, then you knew you wanted to homeschool already. Mm-hmm. And we
decided to homeschool before we ever had children.
Yep.
Before you had children. Yeah. So you knew that, and you have started having children. Where did you get connected to homeschooling once that became a real need then for your family?
The very first homeschool conference we went to was in Modesto, California. And John Calvin, our oldest, was less than 2 years old. Mm-hmm. And I was carrying him in a sling. Mm-hmm. And it really was interesting to me that all those years later, we ended up keynoting the Modesto conference. And I just thought, it's fascinating to see how the Lord used them in my life when John was just a baby, and then we were able to go back and minister into the lives of the people there.
Yeah.
Once John Calvin was an adult.
That's so crazy.
It really is.
And that was really important at that time, because back at that point, this was pre-internet and pre-social media. And so if you wanted any kind of a community, you had to find it or invent it.
Yeah.
And, you know, it was one of those things where you go to the library and there'd be a sign on the bulletin board with little tabs. You pull off somebody's phone number. And that's how we connected up with the homeschooling community at that time.
Yeah, when we moved back to Louisiana, we immediately started looking for homeschoolers, even though John Calvin wasn't even preschool age yet.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
And people looked at us kind of funny, like, why do you want to do this now? Like, because this is where we're going. This is what we're doing.
Yeah.
So we actually started getting involved in homeschool leadership even when our oldest was
funny.
3.
That is really funny. So that is part of your story, homeschool leadership, not just being a speaker or speakers and writers, but homeschool leadership was part of your journey. And I think that was before, had you really started speaking when you first started working in the leadership realm?
No. The reason we got invited into leadership that early in the local support group is that while I was in graduate school, I chose for my major project homeschooling and did a lot of research. And so we had a lot of head knowledge about homeschooling at that time, which was pretty rare back then.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so they invited us to join the local support group's board. Mm-hmm. It was kind of I think they chose us to be in the secretary position because we couldn't do any damage there.
Yeah, that's a great place to start out.
It really is.
Because you do a lot of listening, mainly.
Yeah.
Yes, you do. Yes, you do.
And so we were there in Louisiana about 4 years. And then when we moved up to the Carolinas, it turns out that people we were in our local support group with in Louisiana were on the state board in Louisiana.
North Carolina.
I mean, no, in Louisiana. And they told the board in North Carolina
okay.
about us.
Okay.
When we moved to North Carolina. And so there were people in our local support group in North Carolina who were on the North Carolina State Board.
Okay.
They'd heard about us from Louisiana. And so very shortly after we moved, they invited us to join the North Carolina State Board.
As secretary.
Always a secretary.
Yeah. And so John was maybe 6 or 7. So shortly after we moved to North Carolina, we were invited to join the North Carolina State Board. Our oldest was only like 6 or 7.
That's crazy.
But we had done a lot of studying of homeschooling, and we were really interested in the homeschool movement as a whole. Mm-hmm. And they saw a place for us. And that's really how all this ministry stuff began, was service. We just wanted to serve the homeschool movement and help it to grow strong.
And in the process, you were populating the homeschool movement with boys.
Doing your best.
So I think that's very interesting because, a lot of the times when you have people in leadership, you'll think, well, they're not even a homeschool parent yet. Well, you were barely there, right? But, I think oftentimes there's a lot to be said for understanding things, intellectually. Having a head knowledge of things is good and provides a balance for people. And I often say in leadership, I think that it's good to have somebody that, comes along that observes from a different perspective sometimes, what you're doing and where you're going with your group or with your organization, whatever it is. And that's very interesting to me that you started out in leadership though early, and you guys are great in leadership. And I think that was a phenomenal place for you. But then you were raising all of these boys. And when I first met you, it was, all of it was raising real men. I really didn't know anything else about you guys at that point. It was raising real men. And I always am curious, at what point did you feel like, okay, this is a book we can write and write well and feed into this because, we've been parents of boys, right? but
Well, okay.
they were not completed yet, right?
Yeah.
Well, this is one of those organic kind of things.
Yeah. People ask us, how can somebody learn to do what you're doing? And we're like, we have no idea. Talk to the Lord.
Yeah, it just God pushed it there. No, because what happened was we had
a bunch of boys.
We had a bunch of boys. We had, I think people started asking when we had 4 boys. They're saying, how do you manage all those boys? I'm going crazy with one. And we started getting invitations to speak at like local support groups.
Yeah.
And
Hal had become president of NCHE, our state organization here.
And part of the responsibilities, I'm sure you're the same way. Part of the responsibilities is you're a spokesman for the organization. So people would invite you to come speak about homeschooling, and you say, what do you want me to talk about? And they would find out about our house full of boys. And they say, oh, well, that's interesting.
Yeah. And by that time, our 6th had been born.
So we started talking about this and just found a lot of interest. A lot of people were, scrambling. And saying, how in the world do you manage this? So
because most homeschool parents, especially at that time, were moms at home.
Right.
And many of them from very small families. They might have not even had a brother or had one brother. And, they were struggling with the basics of what is even a boy supposed to be like.
Mm-hmm.
And trying to do school with this creature who would really rather be in a tree, Right. And so it was, people asked us to start speaking about boys. We began speaking at local support groups and at the state conference here.
And we had spoken a couple of times at the North Carolina conference on one topic or another, but we got an invitation to speak at the conference in Arizona, Arizona Families for Home Education. And they gave us a booth in the exhibit hall and
right in front of the doors. And now I grew up in an entrepreneurial family. I knew that was prime real estate.
Yeah, I'm thinking, what do we do with this? I mean, we don't have anything to sell.
And I'm thinking, we have to have something to sell.
And one of our friends said, look, you need to bring your own stuff.
One of our friends had a homeschool bookstore.
Right.
So we said, hey, can we buy the books we recommend wholesale to sell at this conference? And
he wouldn't sell them to us.
He said, no, you need to sell your own stuff. And we're like, what own stuff?
Yeah.
And he said, well, all your CDs and stuff from speaking at the North Carolina conference. I'm like, why would anybody want that?
I mean, total lack of vision, I guess.
But on the way home, a lot of times after we'd speak, people would say, do you have a book? And we'd say, no, we don't have a book. We've got a family. We're barely keeping our heads above water.
Right.
And on the way home, Hal said, honey, I think we ought to write our book. And at this time, our oldest was away at college, so we had an adult child, we had teens. But our baby had just been born with a life-threatening heart condition. I told Hal, I said, you're crazy. We don't have time for this. And the Lord really convicted me. I couldn't sleep that night. So the next day, I sat down, picked a topic out of the air, and started writing. And I sent it up to Hal. Hal was working from home. He was a freelance engineer at the time. I sent it up to Hal's office, and I said, what do you think about this? And he wrote what he thought in and through what I'd written, and we had our first chapter. And it came really quickly after that, because we've been speaking about this for years at this point. Mm-hmm. And so when we got to Arizona, I did this session about being a mom of boys at the time. Mm-hmm. And we had copies of the book, galley copies, right?
Yeah, we had just printed a couple hundred copies. We figured we'll sell them eventually.
Yeah, ARCs, advanced reader copies,
Right.
And I stood up after I did this session about being a mom of boys. I put a picture of the book up on the screen, and I said, very embarrassed. Okay, mm-hmm. I said, Hal and I've written a book. Mm-hmm. And we just brought a couple of boxes, and people got up and started leaving. And I thought, they don't want to hear about this. They don't want to hear what I've got to. They don't want to hear about this commercial. Mm-hmm. So I took my time walking back to the booth. I get to the booth. And
now I'm back at the booth with our heart baby, mm-hmm. and I'm just sitting there just as quiet as a church mouse. And then suddenly all of these people come in the door, and they all come straight to the booth, and they're grabbing the books off the table, and they're talking, and they're asking questions and handing me credit cards. I'm like, oh. And somebody came around behind the table with me, and I said, okay, you take the money and I'll run the credit cards. And I just just the two of us ran the booth until she got back. When she got back, there's nothing on the table.
It looks like the Chicago Stock Exchange around our booth.
Oh,
And
no.
I look on the table. There's nothing on the table. I said, "Hal, you need to put more stuff." And I lifted up the skirt of the table. And there was nothing underneath. We had sold out of everything in 15 minutes.
That's crazy.
And
we went back to the room that night and said, "What is the Lord doing here? What has God just done? I don't know."
And everybody told us don't take advance orders, but people were begging us.
Mm-hmm.
Can we order it? Can you send it to us later? So we said, okay. And people bought tons of advanced orders.
Yep.
So we got back home and I said, Hal, we better find out if this book is actually any good. Mm-hmm. So we started sending it out for review to all kinds of people that we respected, expecting to get kind of, there, honey.
Yeah.
And they started endorsing it.
Yeah.
Blew our minds.
Mm-hmm.
To get endorsements from people like Chris Klicka and Mike Smith,
Ted Tripp,
John Rosemond.
Yeah.
And I was like, what on earth?
Right.
And what we did not know is that this was God's plan. Because a few months later, Hal was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. Mm-hmm. And when he was, all of his clients in his engineering firm dropped him like a brick.
Well, it's awkward if you're halfway through a project and your engineer dies. I mean, that's
and they just assume stage 4, he's going to die.
So
at the same time, the Lord exploded our speaking. Mm-hmm. Because our book was released right as, at the time the national conference was happening, where homeschool leaders from all over the nation get together, and they already knew us. Mm-hmm. So we gave all our friends copies of our books. Mm-hmm. We'd been in that organization at that point for, goodness gracious, 15 years. I don't know. And we start handing out copies of the book. Mm-hmm. We started getting invitations to speak. And engineering collapsed. Speaking exploded. And before we knew it, we were full-time speakers and writers. And it absolutely blew our minds. Not what we were expecting at all. No. But we love it.
And that's great. I mean, it's a great story to share, right? But it's just amazing that there was that plan already in the works that you didn't even know. You didn't know why, really. It happened. But, I think that that's true for so many of us. Like I said, you don't understand how it's all going to look together when it's woven together in the end. But to see it coming together is an incredible, it's an amazing journey, I think. And I think it's so funny because a lot of the time people who are public speakers will have known somewhere in the background that, I'm a public speaker. I don't know how I'm going to speak or where, but I know that I will, and I think it's fun when you come into it from the different perspective. Totally. You knew you were writers and you knew you were parents and you had so much knowledge of other things that you had studied, but public speaking wasn't necessarily on your list of things. And here you go, you're out there and you're doing it. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about your speaking together. It's funny because, whenever we talked about doing this podcast and it was like, normally it's one-on-one, right? One person. And you said, yeah, but can we do it together? I thought, well, that's so Hal and Melanie because it is. I've never really heard you speak apart except maybe Hal one time, I think. I think I've heard Hal speak. But how did you get to the place where that kind of became the way that you did it? Because you guys do it well.
Yeah,
I just have to say.
Okay. Well, you mentioned at that time in Arizona that you were talking about homeschooling boys by yourself.
Right.
And I was sitting back there at the booth.
Yeah.
And that was kind of typical at the time because we had, a few things I talked about, more things that she talked about. And we did one session where we talked about marriage. And we did a,
But that's kind of what's expected. They expect one person to be speaking. Mm-hmm. And I don't even remember the first time we did it, but it was the boys session. We just said, let's do it together. And because we found that, when I spoke, women came. And when Hal spoke, men came.
And when I spoke, I husbands would come up and talk to me and say, I see what you're saying, but I can't get my wife to, my wife doesn't understand, or she doesn't approve of this or whatever. And you got the same thing from the wives.
I would say, I really wish my husband would listen to this, but I just know he won't. Well, we said, let's just do it together and see what happens. Mm-hmm. And we loved doing it together. It's so much more fun. It's so much more natural. Mm. It's more like a conversation. Mm-hmm. I think it's easier to listen to because it's a conversation.
Yeah.
And couples came together. Mm-hmm. And you could see them elbowing each other as we spoke, right. And, passing notes and stuff. And we just felt like there were a lot of benefits to the listener. A lot
more engagement.
Yeah.
And so we said, you know what, why don't we just make this the thing? Why don't we just continue doing this? And so we do occasionally, I'm an elder at our church, so I preach by myself, but we speak individually sometimes, but most of the times on homeschooling topics or family issues or whatever, it's just like this. It's the two of us together.
And I think it's fun for people to hear the guys and the girls' perspective. And when we first started speaking together, when we did like that marriage session, we did it like most people do, where the wife would talk and then it's the husband's turn.
Yeah, chapter 2, but the husband's.
We weren't really good at that because this is the way we live. We just interrupt each other constantly. We talk, we finish each other's sentences. We're two halves of the same mind. And so,
but I think it's funny because you do it well. You don't do it in a distracting way where you are really tripping over each other and stepping on each other. You've really honed the skill of speaking together really well. And I think personally, I love it. And I think you do get, both sides of that brain. Like you said, it's like both perspectives. You've got the whole picture there instead of just looking at it and listening and thinking, well, that's just what she thinks, and what is it really like over there? But let's go back for a minute to the boys and your kids, because now you're raising kids and you're starting to travel and speak, and you're shifting from, not only Hal is shifting from his job that's full-time as an engineer, you're dealing with health issues that are now going to weigh on your family. And let's just talk about that a little bit, because I've known you guys for a long time, and I've kind of seen you all struggle through some of these different points in your life, and still how things have worked out for you, and just, being very blessed in what you're doing. It's like what your message is so important, and you overcome these obstacles, and God provides a way for that.
Well, when we started this, we sat down and we talked about what effect it would have on our family. And we had decided when we first started getting involved in homeschool leadership that we were going to wrap our kids into it as much as possible. Mm-hmm. So our kids volunteered at the state conference. Mm-hmm. They went on speaking engagements with us and helped set up chairs and break them down. Mm-hmm. Well, we decided we wanted to do the same thing if the Lord was going to open a wider ministry to us, that we were not going to lose our kids trying to teach other people how to raise theirs. Yeah. And so we decided there's not going to be any of this leave them with grandma. As much as possible, our kids were going to come with us.
So we pretty much almost exclusively drove to conferences. We've driven all the way to California like 3 times.
Yeah.
And shorter distances a number more times. And when we started out, we had 7 kids in the van with us.
Traveling with us.
We had a baby up to an older teenager. Yeah. And, we just said, okay, this is who we are. We are traveling as a family. We're working. And what we discovered, and this was the kind of funny thing, what we discovered from the ministry standpoint was that people would hear us talk about issues in the family and maybe some things you might consider from a biblical standpoint or whatever, and then they'd come back and they'd look at our kids. and our kids were a good endorsement of because we've really been blessed. The Lord has really blessed us with our kids. We didn't bring them out to show them off or anything, but they were there and people could talk to them without us standing there and coaching them.
Well, they could see that we really lived what we believed. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That it wasn't fake. And that was something that was super important to us when we started this.
Yeah. Somebody asked one of our kids, I said, have you ever gone to listen to your parents speak? He said, we hear it all the time at home. It's not, we don't need to go to a conference to hear our parents. So they're saying the same thing around the dinner table.
But yeah, it was really, really important to us when we started this that we not be fake. Because as homeschool leaders, we knew that there were some fake people in teaching and homeschooling.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really important to us that our kids understand that they came first,
Mm-hmm.
and that we live what we believe, and that we talk what we live.
Yeah, that's the authenticity of, your family, the transparency of the way that you live in front of people, I think sells what you are selling better than anything else. I mean, I have seen your kids at your booths for years, and, they're there. Yeah, they are a great endorsement for what you're saying. But, even more so, I think there's just the understanding that you are, it doesn't separate itself. Who you are and who you live are these parents that are experiencing raising real men and raising young ladies and dealing with the tweens and the teenage years, and all of the things that you speak about, you really have experienced. And it's very obvious when you're there and you see that, but you've not only experienced it, you've done it well.
Well, we had an experience years ago, and I'm not going to name names, but I remember talking to a speaker at a homeschool conference who was speaking very confidently about transitioning your kids to adulthood, helping them to find a mate. And when I sat down and talked to this person, I found out their oldest child was like 14. And I'm like, wait a minute. And we decided we didn't want to talk about things till we had some experience. And so, we didn't, that's why the tween book includes girls. Because by that time, our girls, we had 2 girls after the 6 boys. Mm-hmm. By that time, our girls had been through that stage. And we were able to speak about that. And
I think that's one of the reasons that when you look at the qualifications to be an elder in the church, that the Apostle Paul lays out, he should be a husband, he should be a father who rules his house well, children should be faithful. I think it calls into our view that so much of what we do in our family life is a matter of application. It's not as easy as the 10 commandments that come down from Sinai. It's a matter of, well, how does this apply in our family, our circumstance, this child, this situation? And that requires some leadership of the Spirit, and it requires some experience and some willingness to learn and some willingness to apologize.
Because if I'm speaking directly from the Word of God
mm-hmm.
and teaching the Word of God, yes, Timothy was a young man,
mm-hmm.
but he had the Word of God and could teach from the Word of God.
Right.
Let no one look down on your youthfulness.
Right.
But when you're speaking about practical stuff, really helps to have some experience.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. I agree 100%.
And that's just the commitment that we made. We really wanted to make sure that we didn't speak about things we didn't know anything about.
We wanted to be real. Because like you said, we knew some people who weren't, loved them. Good people loved the Lord, but they were not authentic. And eventually they faltered because they stumbled into something they weren't really equipped to deal with.
Yeah.
So,
I think I'm almost scared, of doing those types of things because, when you're in the public eye and people see what you're doing and hear you speaking and then watch what happens with your family, I think it's hard. Of course, as parents, we can't put a guarantee on every child that we raise doing everything as we would as adults, like everybody knows that part. But you definitely can see the faithfulness of raising your children from someone who's done that, and done that well. I think it's an important need, I think, to have that authentic experience to share with people. And I think that it resonates with people so much stronger. People can encourage you and hype you up about something that they may just talk about and don't really know about. But it's completely different to be encouraged by someone who has authentically experienced something and can give you good insight and good information about how to do what you're doing and encourage you well. It's completely different. But talk to me a little bit about, I know you were speaking and you were writing some, but you guys are definitely entrepreneurial. There's no doubt about that. And I know you have expanded over the years from just a booth and one book. We've seen your booth, so you've done a little bit more. But you have your hands down a lot of different things that you have, and again, brought your family into to see your family, learn, grow, benefit, and help in your business. So, I mean, you've got the press, you've got your boxes, which just eluded the name of them right now. You've got the boxes, you've got the other books that you've written, the swords, and the books that you've done on audio. So, I mean, you've got a ton of different things. Tell me a little bit about how all of that kind of came together.
It came about as we saw needs. That's something that we watch for when we hear people voicing a need, to pay attention.
Well, like the very first year, I mean, the first spring after we introduced our first book, somebody came up to the booth that was vision impaired, and they said, "Do you have an audiobook?" I said, "Well, no." They said, "That would be really helpful." And we said, "Oh, well, okay, let's think about that." And so we recorded our first book in the audio form and have had it available ever since then.
And then we had a very severely dyslexic son who loved audiobooks, and some of the books that had really impacted his siblings were not available in audio. And so we said, well, we need to make audiobooks of these great books so that people like our son can listen to them. So we started the audiobook library that we have. The holiday books came about kind of the same way. People would say, we had the session that we did years ago about how to build unity in your family. And one of the ways that we encourage is building family traditions, and how the holidays are an easy way to do that. And people would come up and say, I just have no idea how to do this. My family was ungodly. The holidays were a drunken nightmare for me. And so we said, well, these people need help knowing how to celebrate the holidays in a godly way. So we write our holiday books. And so it's all just kind of grown from that as people say, I need help with something, we look around and see if there's anybody that has provided help. If so, we point them to it. If not, we try to find a way to meet that need ourselves.
Create it.
That's how the Craftsman Crate came about. People would say,
Crates. Yes,
I cannot get my boys off their devices.
Yeah.
And we talk to our kids about it. A lot of good ideas come from our kids.
Yeah.
How do people get their kids off their devices? Well, Mom, they got to have something more interesting to do.
Yeah. They said, there's nothing out there for teenage guys. Everything is rainbows and unicorns and stuff. They don't have anything that, a teenage boy would be interested in. We said, well, what would you suggest? And they started to come up with ideas, and that kind of grew into our subscription box.
Yeah, we made some craft kits, and people at conferences said, I wish I could just order one of these every month. And we said, okay.
Oh, wow.
So
that's great.
And then same thing, people started, in fact, Florida was the first place it came up. So Mom said, I'm just dying to buy a Craftsman Crate for my son, but he's not old enough yet. I wish you had a simpler kit for younger kids. So this year we came out with Apprentice.
There you go.
That parents can use with their younger kids. So it's just, we try to listen for what people need. And the book we're working on right now actually flowed out of Virginia and Florida's conferences. Virginia asked us to do a leadership conference about communication. And it got such a response, way more than we were expecting. So we put together a workshop for your conference in Florida about communicating as a family. And man, we had dads at the booth crying, saying, man, I just wish I'd known this. We said, you know what? We need to write a book.
It's so important. I think, you bring about a really strong point for people who are out there, who are speaking and who are doing things. A lot of the time, I think you can get so focused on what you think your vision and your plan is. But listening to the people who, are listening to you has been a super successful business model for you guys. Like listening to what the people need and answering the need has been, really great for you guys.
That's how we've always come up with workshop topics. That, we often stay in people's homes as we travel. And when you hear people asking the same questions in Tennessee that they are in California, that they are in Saskatchewan, you say, you know what, this is the need.
Well, I mean, it's encouraging. I think it's encouraging to see the way that you guys have grown just over the time that I've known you in your ministry and the things that you offer, to people. I think it's super encouraging to see a family the size of yours, who has gone, you've dealt with not just Hal's cancer battle, but you've had your own issues that you've dealt with. You've had children who have had health issues. And during those times, you guys have still been super productive and just pouring back into the homeschooling community and pouring back into families. And I think that just speaks volumes about the heart of your family in doing that, because there were times that your kids had to come along and really be supportive of the ministry.
I think we've really learned that the ideal situation never arrives. And there will be challenges, there will be obstacles, and you have to decide, okay, is this worth doing? Can I find a way to do it in spite of, having 7 young children to carry around the van across the country, or in spite of having to arrange for chemotherapy when I'm in a different state, or whatever? We just decided we're going to try to make this work, and God will help us. If it needs to be done, God will empower it.
And God has purpose in our suffering. I would not choose to have all the health issues we've had. Heaven knows there have been a ton of them. Mm. I don't think there's a member of our family that has been spared. And when you're getting ready to go on stage and you're so sick you can barely stand up, and you feel terrible and you're in pain, and you can't even think, and you walk out there and the Lord makes it happen, then it's Him and not you.
Mm. True. So true.
And when we have a wild year where everybody's sick and there's all kinds of issues and things are happening, and somehow everything works out and the Lord really blesses and we have a great year with the business, we know it's Him and not us.
Right.
And the Lord says He will not share His glory with another. And I just think that the Lord allows us to go through these things so much to know that He is the one that is making all this happen. It's not us. It's not that we're brilliant or wonderful or something, but it's that He's brilliant and wonderful. And He does it despite us. Mm. And I think it also gives hope to families. I felt very discouraged sometimes. I would hear speakers when I was a young homeschool mom, and it sounded like they had everything together, and I could not get everything together. Mm-hmm. And I think it's encouraging to families to see that, things aren't perfect for us. Mm-mm. We don't even have perfect days.
No. Oh, no.
And yet the Lord accomplishes His purpose in us. Mm-hmm. And I think people need to see that. They need to see that, just like it encourages us to know that Paul dealt with thorns in the flesh and struggles, and yet he was faithful. I think it's encouraging to folks when we do what we can and serve the Lord and let Him bring about the results.
Yeah, it's true. And I think that, through the years that I've known you all, and you've been a huge encouragement to me as a parent, as a leader, as just friends. And, I think that the one thing I would say is that I would never look at you and doubt for one moment that, you would claim all of the reason for your success or all of the glory for what you do. And again, it makes you very authentic. And I believe that that's the charm of the Youngs, honestly, is the authenticity. And I love it. I truly appreciate you all being here with me today and sharing your story with me and just encouraging families the way that you do all across the United States and the world. And, it makes me happy every time I see the next thing that you're doing, because it gives me the reminder that I can still do more too. So it's like, it's there. But let me ask you this one thing. If you have it, if you don't, that's fine. But is there a thought of, words of wisdom or a quote that maybe you have just embraced in your life that gives you the courage to keep doing what you're doing, or encouragement to do what you're doing, that even if it was when you were younger, or if it's something that resonates with you now?
The passage that I encountered as a new believer was Romans 8:28, where we know that God works all things together for good for those who love God and who are called according to His purpose. And I have come back around to that so many times, when it's just a matter of, I can't find a parking place close to the door, to you got a cancer diagnosis that you may not survive. At every point I think, okay, God has a purpose. He is a good and loving Father. He's going to bring us through this. I don't know how, but I'm going to trust him. That's been such a touchstone for me.
Because our story is the story of people that have a great God, and he has taken ordinary people and has done some pretty extraordinary things that we have a hard time believing for his glory and for his purpose. And we're just along for the ride. I remember years ago, a friend's emails closed. She said, when I decided to serve God, I didn't know life was going to be like this. Every time I sit down in an easy chair, a bar falls across my lap, and I hear a voice saying, keep your hands and feet in the vehicle at all times. Hope you enjoy your ride. And that's very much been the way our lives have been. That, we want to please God. We want to glorify God. And it has been a very exciting roller coaster ride.
It's exciting. And you're going to keep doing it, right?
Oh, yeah. If somebody asked us, what's your retirement plan? I said, a casket. Yeah.
The big
I'm going to live until I'm not alive anymore. That's it.
That's right. If I had all the money in the world and all the free time in the world, we would be doing exactly what we're doing now.
Thanks for listening to the Not by the Book podcast from the Florida Parent Educators Association. To learn more about homeschooling in Florida or to find resources to help you on this amazing journey, visit our website at FPEA.com. If you have any suggestions for future guests, contact me, Suzanne, at notbythebook@fpea.com. Thanks again for listening, and be inspired to live your life not by the book.